We're looking at solving an equation here. So to start off with, first of all, it isn't a usual format equation. It doesn't seem like linear. It doesn't seem like a quadratic because it doesn't have a square on it. It's got a fraction in it. So let's deal with the fraction first and try and get it into a form that we are more familiar with. So when we want to get rid of a fraction, i.e. the denominator, we're going to times both sides of the equation, the left-hand side and the right-hand side, by what's on the denominator. So I'm going to write down my equation first, x minus 16 over x is equal to 6. And I'm going to times both the left-hand side and the right-hand side by x. So all of the left-hand side I'm going to multiply by x, and all of the right-hand side I'm going to multiply by x. If I multiply all of my left-hand side by x, I have, if you want to think about it, this is the same as x over 1. So I have x times x, which is x squared. And then I have x times 16 over x, which simplifies to just minus 16. And on the right-hand side, I'm left with 6x. It's now looking a bit familiar now. It looks like a quadratic because we've got the square on it. But whenever we solve a quadratic equation, or any equation, matter of fact, which is other than a linear one, we should be trying to get everything onto one side and make it equal to 0. So minus 6x from both sides results in x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0. So now that we have it in the form of a quadratic, in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, we can use one of 4 methods for solving this quadratic equation. We're going to look at all 4 methods here. Method 1 would be the technique that we use for non-calculator paper, which would be by factorizing. So method 1 is factorizing. So let's go and factorize this equation. So x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0. And let's find the common factors of minus 16, the factors of minus 16 that multiply together. Well, first of all, we can have the factors of minus 16 are 4 and minus 4, or we can have 8 and minus 2, or we can have minus 8 and 2. And we're looking for the pair that add up to give us the minus 6, which is this pair here. So since there is no coefficient of x squared, we can simply go and factorize this quite easily. X minus 8 and x plus 2 equals to 0. We've factorized it. Now both of these factors are multiplying to give us an answer of 0. So x minus 8 could be 0. One of the factors could be 0, or the other factor, x plus 2, could be 0 in order for us to get an answer of 0 when they are multiplied together. And this then gives us x is equal to 8, or x is equal to minus 2. So this is solving a quadratic equation by factorizing. If we cannot factorize, then we can use the quadratic formula, which is the second method I'm going to show you. And this is more typically on a calculator exam paper. Method 2, quadratic formula. Start off with the same equation, x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0. Write down our quadratic formula, which is x is equal to minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You need to remember this, you need to memorize this. Let's write down what the general form of a quadratic equation is. It's ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. So from here we can see that a coefficient is 1, b is minus 6, and c is minus 16. So we simply go and substitute this into our equation, replace all substitutions with brackets. B is minus 6 plus or minus square root of minus 6 squared minus 4 bracket 1, and c is minus 16 all over 2 lots of 1. And if we go and type that into our calculator, make sure our display looks exactly like what's written down. Use the plus in the first instance, and that gives us an answer of x is equal to 8, and when you use the minus, one of them gives us or x is equal to minus 2. And as we can see, these are exactly the same answers as we got when we factorized. Now let's take a look at method 3. And method 3 is by completing the square. So we start off with the same equation, x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0. Let's go and look at how we complete the square on this. So we want to get it into the square form. So first of all, we're going to have x minus half of the b term here, all squared. If we were to expand this, we would get x squared minus 6x, which is exactly what we have here. But then we would also get a plus 9, which we don't want. So we need to get rid of that. So we need to get rid of that 3 squared, which gets us that extra 9. Now what I've got written here, will, if I expand it and tidied up, will give you exactly the same as what's on x squared minus 6x. So this x minus 3 bracket squared minus 9 will give us exactly what x squared minus 6x is. This is the process of completing the square where we write down a bracket squared, i.e. getting a square number here. Don't forget the minus 16, add that at the end, equals to 0. Let's tidy this up a bit. X minus 3 all squared, minus 9 minus 16 is minus 25 equals to 0. So now that it's in the form of completing the square, we can solve from here by not expanding and getting it back to x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0, because then we end up where we started. But can you see now that originally what we started off with was an equation that had x's in 2 places. We had an x squared term and an x term, and we were unable to solve equations which have x's in 2 places. Now, by completing the square, what you achieve is you get the x to be written only in one place. As you can see, it's here. So you can ask yourself, what's happened to x? When x is only written in one place, you can ask yourself, what operations have been applied to it? Similar to a linear equation where x is only in one place. So what operations have been applied to it? Well, it's been subtracted by 3 first, and then the bracket was squared, so then it was squared, and then we minus 25 to get an answer of 0. We're going to do the reverse of that, inverse, and go do the exact opposite. So instead of minus 25, we're going to plus 25, inverse operation. Instead of squaring, we're going to do square root. And instead of minus 3, we'll plus 3. So this is what we want to do then to both sides of our equation. So starting by plussing 25 to both sides of the equation results in us having this. Done that. Now we're going to square root both sides. Now remember, when you square root, you can get a positive or a negative answer. So we could get plus or minus square root of x minus 3 all squared. Okay, we don't need to write down the plus or minus on the left hand side because the two options we're going to get is a positive or a negative. As long as you put your plus or minus on one of the sides, that's absolutely fine. So I've left it on that one there. So what happens, the square root and the square root are the inverse operations to each other. So in effect, they cancel out, leaving us with x minus 3 on the left hand side, and plus or minus square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. So then we can add 3 to both sides to get x is equal to plus or minus 5 plus 3. Done that. Let's write down what those are. X is equal to plus 5 plus 3, which is 8, or x is equal to minus 5 plus 3, which is x is equal to minus 2. Again, we get exactly the same solutions by completing the square. And the final method that we're looking at is the graphical method. Start by writing the equation and how we actually plot this. Well, x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to 0. How can we plot this on an xy axis? Well, originally this would have been probably written as x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals to y. Now, since you have an x and y, you can plot that. So what does solving actually mean? Solving means we're finding out the solutions of the equation, and solutions are when y is equal to 0. Which is why when we go to solve, we actually make it equal to 0, because we're looking at where it crosses the x-axis, and when something crosses the x-axis, the y values are 0. So I'm going to start by drawing a little sketch here. Get my grid in here, my xy grid. Go. And let's go and start to draw this. So how can we draw this? Well, we said here that solving means we're finding out where it crosses the x-axis. And when something crosses the x-axis, the y value is 0. So that's where we get to that. So how do we sketch that? Well, we get x squared minus 6x minus 16 is equal to 0. And if we were to factorize that, that would have got us x minus 8, x plus 2 equals to 0. So from here we know that it crosses the x-axis at x is equal to 8 or x is equal to minus 2. So what we would have had is we would have had a sketch. And the sketch would have been a quadratic. And where it goes through the x-axis, i.e. when y is 0, that is solving graphically. So if you simply read off the x values here, x is equal to minus 2 or x is equal to 8 would be our solutions. If we had the graph drawn, we would simply be reading off where it crosses the x-axis, which is when y is 0. So in summary, these are the 4 methods of solving a quadratic equation: by factorizing, by using the quadratic formula, completing the square or graphical method. Factorizing is the non-calculator method. Quadratic formula is usually a calculator method. Completing the square can be done on non-calculator method, and graphical can be neither calculator or non-calculator. It doesn't matter because it's reading off from the graph. We did something to begin with, which was to rearrange an equation which didn't quite look like a quadratic, first of all. And then we saw that it was actually quadratic, and so there you have it.